Good evening, campers, streamers, and babysitters, and welcome to our raw reaction review for The Black Phone 2. As Finney, now 17, struggles with a life after his captivity, his sister begins receiving calls in her dreams from the Black Phone and seeing disturbing visions of three boys being stalked at a winter camp known as Alpine Lake. Well, Luke. The sequel that never should have been. And don't mind me, guys. I'm just a little under the weather, so sorry if my voice is a little grating. But I wasn't going to miss this. I had to go check this out. You know, we loved the first film. It was, would you say that was a surprise for us maybe the first year? Like maybe how much we loved it?
I think it was a surprise on how much we loved it. I know we were both excited for it because didn't it initially get pushed back? It had a certain date, and then I remember seeing that trailer and thinking, "Oh, I'm really excited for this." And I think it got pushed back to June of what was that, 2023?
Yeah.
I can't remember, but and then going into that format, I mean, Ethan Hawke's performance was just absolutely insane, and just I wasn't familiar with the story going in. I read the short story after seeing the film just to be able to compare it. But yeah, that one was certainly a surprise on how much we loved it. That was, I think, my second favorite of the year, and probably just because I watched it so many times in preparation for it. I think we did so many things regarding the Black Phone that year. So certainly one that was for the books, I would say.
Yeah, it's definitely been one of our favorites, one we've talked about consistently. Basically really put Scott Derrickson like up there for us, because I think admittedly before I bring it up all the time, like Sinister was one that I kind of wrote off because like when it came out I just thought, you know, oh, this just looks generic and goofy, and I saw it as a kid renting it from like Redbox, I think, so it's like I hadn't given it a real fair shot since then. So when the first film was coming out I rewatched Sinister and was like, wow, this is like actually really solid. And the Black Phone 2, great follow-up. And you know, we like a lot of Scott Derrickson stuff, but I think the thing that still loomed over the Black Phone 2, the thing that was just a little odd to us was just like, all right, the Black Phone is kind of a finalized, very contained one story. It does not leave you in a place where you think, oh, we're going to have a sequel. But hey, it's 2025 and we're here now. And Luke, how was the Black Phone 2?
Well, like you said, Dylan, this was a big surprise that they announced a sequel, and right off the bat, they said, we have a story that we do like and that justifies, you know, getting a sequel out there, something that we can kind of make work. And I was excited that Black Phone 2 was happening, a little hesitant just because of how much I love the original. But walking out of the theater after seeing Black Phone 2, I'll say I enjoyed this one. I think they take it into some interesting places. Does everything work in this film? I don't think so. I think there are some things that might be a little bit of a reach, maybe that you're going to wrestle with when you walk out of the theater. And I think there's going to be people on either side of this. If I don't know necessarily if a sequel needed to be made, and then other people saying, okay, yep, this certainly justifies its existence. I think I'm more so leaning on that it does justify its existence, but I do wrestle with a few things in this one.
Agreed. This was quickly becoming probably not my most anticipated of the year, but like the trailers were really good. And you know, they were trailers that I was worried were giving a lot away. They give a good bit away, about your standard, like I'd say just a hair under your normal stereotypical Blumhouse trailer. So, you know, you're seeing a lot of stuff, but they don't actually like give you beat by beat the story. And I don't know, I felt walking out of this movie that, just like you, I enjoyed quite a bit of this. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. There's a lot of stuff that I was actually quite surprised I enjoyed as much as I did, and a lot of stuff that I think they handled quite well. But yeah, there are just a minor couple things that do hold this back from ever, like, really truly, I think, surpassing, let alone being on that exact same level as the Black Phone. But that's not a bad thing. This movie is certainly a good sequel, I could say that.
Without question, I think one of the big elements that this does excel at is the amount of gore and just
Oh yeah.
disturbing imagery that the Black Phone 2 has. So certainly going prepared for that. I mean, if you're a fan of the original, I think you should be prepared for it, but I think this might take it even an extra step from some of the images that we do see. There's a few sequences that dive into the supernatural that are really, really wild, and not necessarily something I was prepared that they were going to go that deep with it, because they do not shy away from the elements of gore and just really disturbing imagery in general. It's going to really sit with you, and that's going to be one of the big talking points, I think, walking out of the Black Phone 2, because they really do double down on that. And I enjoyed it. I love seeing that the way that it was shot, it has such an interesting aesthetic to it as well. So they're really bringing that gore, but then they're also bringing those elements from the original Black Phone that really make this feel, it has that kinship to the original and feels like that natural progression that we get. So that was one of my big pluses with this film, because I wasn't sure how deep they were going to dive down that route, just because it's probably got a bigger audience than the Black Phone, because people are going to want to go see the sequel here. But hey, they went for it, and I'll say they excelled at it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Halloween to Halloween 2 approach, but like in the best ways. I don't think that they necessarily rely on gore as like a, a huge selling factor. Like you said, it was surprising because I think the first film is so restrained in that sense. Like there's a handful of shots and a handful of things where it's like, yeah, it gets a little bloody, but like, this one they really do go for it. And I think a lot of that comes from this angle they're taking with Ethan Hawke's character of the grabber, in the sense that he is, like many people have said, and we've said it a bunch, almost like this Freddy Krueger like character now, who's kind of using I would you say dreams, kind of like this ethereal plane of existence in a way. They don't necessarily directly say what it is. It's like dreams sort of, but there's also a couple other things that come into play here. I kind of like the ambiguous nature of it. I'm happy we don't learn everything of like how this is working, or really any true explanation, because that was another thing that worried me going into this. Was I was like, how are we going to separate ourselves from things like Nightmare on Elm Street without people being like, oh, this is just the replacement for that? I mean, that was the joke going into it, but I think they did a good job by, again, really setting the stage, letting that take its time. Because one of the things that surprised me that I was actually really happy with on reflection, especially after sitting on it for a night, was like Ethan Hawke's character is not like, he's in the movie a lot, but he's not a huge focus towards the start. It's almost like he's this looming shadow throughout probably the first act and a half of this movie. Like you see flashbacks of him and you see little hints and things, like we all know it's coming, but I love that. I felt like that was a really nice way to like have him still there without actually being present on screen.
And after seeing that first trailer, everyone was making those Nightmare on Elm Street jokes. It looks like the grabber's haunting you through your dreams, and everyone got excited about that. I was excited about it, but I wanted something not just a ripoff of Nightmare on Elm Street. And I will say the Black Phone 2 finds its own avenue into bringing that supernatural element into, like Dylan said, it's a little bit harder to define than just going through your dreams to attack you. So they take a completely different route in that sense, where the approach feels different. So it doesn't feel like a ripoff of Nightmare on Elm Street. So it's a little more complicated than what you get with something like Freddy Krueger, and harder to define. But I like that, how ambiguous that is as well, because you're diving into the supernatural. And I wasn't sure how that was going to work for me. And to be honest, going into this, when we kind of get our first big taste of that supernatural scene, I didn't know how it was going to really work. When that first popped up on screen, I wasn't necessarily vibing with that scene 100%. I thought this just feels a little bit off. But as we get deeper into the film, it just feels way more natural up until we get to the third act, and it absolutely works. You really lose yourself in this kind of no boundaries of where the grabber can be, and I like that aspect of it. It adds a lot to the terror, and there's just some places that they go that this never feels like a Nightmare on Elm Street ripoff. It doesn't feel like they're paying tribute or anything. It really just feels like its own vehicle. And when we get to that third act, there's just some devices that they use to really create these interesting, just terrifying scenes between the grabber and some of the cast in here that really are just scary that it was like, it does make you hungry to see another Nightmare on Elm Street film, but this doesn't feel like a blatant ripoff in any sense. Black Phone 2 certainly feels like its own thing in the way that they use the grabber, like you said, a little bit sparing, more so in the beginning. He's that looming specter, and just being able to see the fallout, the PTSD everyone has from an event like that, built him up to even be scarier by the time we actually get to him.
Yeah, and Ethan Hawke is amazing. I love this character. I love him being this just like vindictive, evil bad guy. And I was surprised because not only was he sparingly used in the beginning, but when he was here, we did have moments with him. We had moments to sit down where it's like, you would think these would be like exposition scenes. And oddly enough, we talked about this out of the theater with our buddy Killjoy Jake, who saw this with us, that like, there's a certain sect of this movie that I have problems with, you have problems with. We'll get into it in a little bit without getting into spoilers, but oddly enough, there's a scene that leads into that aspect that I absolutely adore. I thought was such a great, really grounded, really still very scary, but also just really different, just really showing how Freddy Krueger, if we were doing this, he's got this kind of fun-loving kind of goofiness to him as the series goes on. This feels more like Nightmare on Elm Street 1 style Freddy with this scene, where it's like he's evil, but he's also just like kind of with dancing around it. It's really tough to talk about. But he's also just kind of like, I guess taking his time a bit. He's also really not fully understanding how his powers work, what's going on, what he is, but he's just kind of taking it in stride. And I thought that was a really, really interesting and really almost introspective look, because for a while there, you think once he's, like I said, he's this looming specter throughout the movie. And then once he actually starts popping up, it's kind of just like, okay, so he's probably just going to be like, attacking in these little dreams or these visions, whatever. And that's going to be pretty much about it. That's how we're going to see him. But they actually do spend some time with him that I was surprised. And it gives Ethan Hawke a chance to stretch his legs and really give you, kind of something vaguely similar to the first one when he would just come downstairs and talk to Finney. But like, you get little bits of who he is. And I love that here because they found a way to do that, because that was another thing that I thought was going to be missing from this movie. It's like, well, if he's just this, dreamscape, character, how are we going to give him those moments to really like get into his psyche and give him a chance to kind of eat up some scenery? And he absolutely does. And that scene in particular is my favorite.
And that element of him, going downstairs, talking with the kids and having that kind of relationship with them in the first one, that is missing in the Black Phone 2. I think maybe people will miss that after seeing the sequel, but they find a way. I think they were aware of it going into the sequel, so they found a way to kind of inject a scene for that. And that scene that you're talking about, the setup there is perfect. Just the interaction in general is terrifying. It builds so much tension. It's shot well, and it really just gets you lost in that scene of what they're delivering. Ethan Hawke's performance, his delivery in that is absolutely wonderfully terrifying. It's so scary. Anytime you get that dialogue with the grabber when he's got the mask on, I love his reasoning that he gives in that scene as well, just because you get a little bit into the head of the grabber. And like you said, he's learning his powers, and I love that he's not the know-all of everything. He's
not an arbiter. He's just like, I'm just here messing with what I got,
Yep. He's like sometimes even surprised by the power that he does have, I think, in certain aspects. Now, like you said, there's a payoff to the scene that we're talking about that deepens the narrative that I'm just not really a fan of, even sitting on it after the theater. It seems like that was one of the elements when they were coming up with this idea that they said, okay, we need this. And it just doesn't feel organic to the story. It does honestly feel like something you would add into a sequel to make it tie in the best that you can. It just doesn't feel like it was needed. I think actually leaving that element out of the story could have been way better and even 10 times more heartbreaking in a sense. We talked about it getting out of the theater, and I instantly had a different idea of where I think it could have went. And I think that could have been way better than what we do get. So that's certainly a big portion of the film that I struggle with, just because it does feel like an added element to justify the sequel's existence.
Yeah, I love the way you put that, where it's like that does seem like it does very much feel like that's an avenue you would go if you're just like Black Phone 2 or Black Phone's a success. What's a sequel? Where could we go? What's a story thread we could pick up on? And it does feel that way. And I think like the movie around that is really solid, because yeah, that just feels that element is very forced. I feel like it doesn't feel natural. It asks us to suspend some disbelief, and I know I'm saying that about a guy who's killing people in their dreams, but it's like I it's just a stretch, and I think that many of you, when you see the movie, will absolutely hone into what we're talking about, because it is probably going to be the biggest thing holding this back from being like better than the first or anything like that, because beyond just that element, really, there's not a whole lot to sneer at. I think that like just visually taking this like kind of a similar but different approach by putting this in a different setting, having us in this Alpine Lake cabin camp thing during a blizzard. Oh man, that was awesome. Like, I love the scenery in here. I love how Scott Derrickson shot it and how he decided to use the space. I can tell you the grittiness of that, snowstorm mixed with some of that 16 millimeter footage and how they implement that. And just the grabber in general in the snow. I love it. And I want a NECA figure of the grabber from this movie. Like, there are so many wonderful effects, so many wonderful practical, and admittedly towards the end a couple of CG things that are it's Blumhouse, it is what it is, but like the stuff that he do where it's like he is running around and he's kind of got this very, very cold, very like frostbitten kind of like look to him. There's details in there that I just adore, and you can tell they really had a lot of fun by having the grabber no longer held to the bounds of reality.
You really feel exhausted by how cold the film feels. You almost like feel cold in the theater. That was a thought I had, just because of the abundance of snow and how they're able to really just build the setting and really make that a big device in the film. And it works really well because it just adds another element of terror to it. I love the grabber's design too. It looks great. The way that he progresses throughout the film as well is just really well done and really scary. So that portion of it, I think, was fantastic. The use of the 16 millimeter footage too, the way they intertwine that and use that as a device throughout the sequel here, I think is even more meaningful than the way that they used it in the Black Phone. It was just like when we saw the Black Phone, it was like, oh cool, it's very got that sinister vibe to it. But there was honestly even a bigger method to the madness in Black Phone 2 with that 16
Oh yeah.
millimeter. And when we get into those cold scenes, especially when we're dealing with the victims, oh god, absolutely heartbreaking imagery that we see throughout there. Just again feels so exhausting from the weather perspective, from the amount of gore that we see on the screen as well. And I love the avenues that they did take with this one and a lot of the story here. It just really did work. It is an interesting sequel, and Ethan Hawke just absolutely excels at being a villain. I love him when he's a good guy, but him as a grabber is just absolute money.
I could watch The Grabber, like a movie with him or just his character, for hours. I love the craziness, because it's like he truly feels evil. Like, it's like because he's got that likability to him, and they really do let Ethan Hawke shine a little bit and give him some more time. It's like, again, you talk about how the grabber like surprises himself a little bit with his powers. I feel like Ethan Hawke surprises himself with just how much like depth he's able to put into this character. You can really tell like he's just an actor who's enjoying his time with this character and in this film, because I'm sure it's a blast. And this one, again, he gets to do so much more than just your stereotypical like I'm abducting kids and keeping them in my basement or whatever. It's like he does a lot, and I think that like that is a key element, obviously, that has to work, especially with going into the kind of Nightmare on Elm Street stuff. I will say the biggest surprise outside of Ethan Hawke, well, I wouldn't say he's a surprise, but like the biggest, I think like next person that I want to give like credit to that I think really aced it this time around, funny enough, I talked a lot of positivity about Madeleine McGraw in the first film. I think Mason Thames as Finney really gets that seat this time around, where it's like Madeleine McGraw's character of Gwen had so much like funny, interesting, kind of like goofy humor, but then also just like had this really this heart and soul to her character that you just kind of was infectious and you fell in love with. As to where Finney, I feel like we are really locked into his trauma. There's a scene towards the beginning of this movie that is a callback. He's just, I'll just say, standing on his back porch. I loved it. It just explains perfectly what this character has been through the last 4 years since the incident with the grabber and just what his day-to-day life is. He's definitely, I think, the standout in this. Mason Thames, I thought, gave a wonderful, wonderful performance here.
Very different than the first film. There's just so much anger built up in his character, and rightfully so. I think the very first time that we do see him on screen, it's kind of a tribute to Robin from the first one, and he's in this fight, and you could just feel that aggression exuding off him in the way that he's dealing with the instance with the grabber and how everyone knows what he's been through and even sometimes pokes fun at him. So a way different dynamic in the character and what he's struggling with now, that element of PTSD, but then also still protective of his sister. It's a really interesting dynamic as he's growing up. In that first one, they had so many problems with the father. So he's kind of, even though they're in a better place for the sequel, he's still kind of taking on that fatherly role with his sister, but then also dealing with that PTSD with the grabber. And then we actually drop the grabber back into a situation, have to see him still struggle with that, even though he's never even over the events of when the grabber was still actually living. So, man, what a progression to that character. And some of the scenes in there are just absolutely heartbreaking as we get further and further into the film, especially when we're dealing with the supernatural elements as well. He really sells his character from every different standpoint, and just the way him and, while limited, the way that him and Ethan Hawke play off each other, it is so well done. It gave you those nostalgic vibes from that first one. It's like, this is what I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for these two to interact.
Yeah, and I can say on the flip side of that, the only actor I would say, and again, it's no slight to her, I think that she's great. Clearly the first film does that. I felt like when it came to the writing of Gwen, Madeleine McGraw's character, I felt like they left her a little younger than she was supposed to, where Mason Thames Finney feels this maturing progression with his character. It feels natural. There are moments where Gwen feels, very on that same level. You can tell that it's been 4 years. She's grown up a little bit more. She's got a lot more on her plate, a lot more just personally to deal with. But like, there are moments when it just feels like they throw her back into kind of being that shit talking little kid again that we all fell in love with in the first movie. And it's just like, there are a lot of lines from her that feel very forced. They feel very like, okay, yeah, all right, I see what you're doing. I get it. This is that character's thing. And they don't really lean off of that. I feel like that's an element where it's like, ooh, the audience really loved that. The couple of jokes and the couple of things we threw in there. And they really doubled down on it here. And I feel like it was a disservice to her character a bit. I feel like there are moments where she's great, not like knocking her for a performance standpoint, strictly just how they wrote the character, that again, they make me roll my eyes in a few spots.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that one as well. I think, from a writing perspective, like 96, 97% of this film's great. And then there's just a little percentage for me that didn't work. A lot of it has to do with some funny elements that I'm just like, I don't know necessarily if it's needed at this moment. And some of it didn't really hit for me. So I think it does go back to the writing and just the dialogue choices that they did with that character for a little bit, because I agree there are some scenes where you're just really into it. And then there are just those couple scenes that's like, I could have really done without that. I don't think I needed that from this character right now. So but overall, I think her character works from where she's at in the spot from the events from the first one. She plays well off of Mason Thames' character as well. And the way that they interact with the grabber, I love that Madeleine McGraw and Ethan Hawke get a little more screen time as well with their relationship there. I think that's a lot of fun. And even the supernatural element that they bring there is really scary, where I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a scene where Madeleine McGraw's character's got a some blood on her feet, and I was like, oh, that's a really fun element that they're bringing in when we're dealing with the supernatural. So there's some really fun scenes with her as well.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say overall, I'm gonna sit with a recommend on the Black Phone 2. I think that this is totally a sequel that has justified its own existence, which is extremely important when it comes to movies that just feel so final, like the Black Phone. And I would say, honestly, like where I'm sitting with this is I would be curious to see this story continue. But again, I think they have to have a good story. I know that's like really basic and like every movie has to have a good story, but like I think that they had an idea here and they pursued it and I'm happy with it. So if we go a few years without a Black Phone 3 or whatever it takes, let's just not force it. But I would be very curious, especially to see the Grabber return and dive a little bit deeper. We were pitching kind of back and forth little ideas outside of the theater, and I think there's definitely a way you could do it. But at the same time, if this is the last time we stop into the world of the Black Phone, I am happy to report that we have two very solid films. Again, the second one I don't think is like perfect, but definitely justifies its own existence, and I can say is definitely worth going out and checking out this Halloween season.
Black Phone 2 is absolutely a bonus round, something we didn't need for the, as a sequel, a follow-up. That Black Phone never really, you never look at that film and say there's definitely going to be a definite sequel. But honestly, Black Phone 2 is a sequel in all the best ways. It justifies its existence, I think, to an extent. There can be a case made that it's like, I don't think we needed this one, but I think this one provides enough fun, enough gore, really zeroes down on that aesthetic that we want, especially with the cold stuff. Really has a different appeal than the first one. They kind of take it a step further. So I really enjoy that. A lot of great performances. When we get into that supernatural element, I love the way they present it. Some of the limits, the no limits that we have in there, and just making it its own thing. So I'm going to go with a recommend on this one as well. I think I talked about it out of the theater that I think this one's going to be even more fun on rewatches. I think this one's going to be a good time just to throw on and really just sit with those scenes and have some fun with, not take it too seriously, but they really do have a lot of dread, a lot of gore, and a lot of tension in this one. So definitely, if you have the time this weekend, go check out the Black Phone 2.
Yeah, this is just one of those properties for me that's like, it's Blumhouse, but it's like almost Blumhouse adjacent, because like this is not like their Megans and their other things where it's like that's very purely Blumhouse. You can tell there's a vision here, there's a story here, there's people behind this who are telling the story that they really want to tell, and I think that that's kind of the best part about this, is to where it's like we're not forcing a sequel. They legitimately do have ideas here that are compelling, that are interesting, with performances that definitely some surpass the first, some live up to the first, and some have some weak spots. But yeah, like you said, it's definitely one of those things where it's like, this is a sequel that I think more people will enjoy than hate. And I think this will be something that a lot of people will be able to say, hey, the Black Phone 1 and 2, very good duology here, whatever you want to call it. Like, I think I think they're solid movies. And I think that Scott Derrickson, Ethan Hawke, all the people should be very proud of what they've done here. Now, let's not overdo it. Like I said, let's get a third one only if it matters, or only if they have a story to tell. But again, I'm really happy with what we have out of the Black Phone 1 and 2, and I hope that the rest of you will be when you go check it out this weekend. So that's going to wrap it up for us here, guys. Thank you so much for watching our review of the Black Phone 2. Let us know down below, are you going to check this one out? Were you a fan of the first one? Were you kind of like indifferent about it, but you're curious about this one? And yeah, what's other Joe Hill properties? Yes, the son of Stephen King himself, the original writer of the Black Phone. Would you like to see come to the big screen? Would you like to see Scott Derrickson maybe tackle another one of those? Or do you think that they should finally get the kick the can, get it moving on Nightmare on Elm Street, and we should have him tackle it? Because I think he's a good contender. I think this is definitely... It's almost like a soft pitch to the studios to be like, hey, have you ever figured this out? I got it. And I think he's got a chance. Now, the only thing that would suck is if they're too similar. But hey, we'll see what happens. They might not do anything with Nightmare on Elm Street, unfortunately. this is the world we live in. Rights issues, baby. What it is. But yeah, guys, that's going to wrap us up here. So until next time, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.
Do the hard shit, gonna do it live. Cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna smash your ass.